Session 2 tonight, the blank that we're filling in this conversation tonight is this: we are prayerful. We are prayerful, all right? So session 2 tonight is focused on the topic of we are prayerful. Acts chapter 1, verse 8, just to remind you why this summer series is so incredibly important. Here's why. Acts 1:8 says this. Well, it's not on the screen. I'll read it to you. But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and all Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. We have to have constant reminders of this. Let me tell you. Our church's mission is not dependent, that's the blanks that you have, is not dependent on the place, the building. It's not dependent on programs like organized ministry. It's not dependent on people like specific groups in the church. It's not dependent on personalities, specific leaders like me. Rather, what Acts 1:8 teaches us is that our church's mission, and we as a people, right? We are the church, but our sense of mission, our identity as missional people is not dependent on those things I just listed, but rather is only dependent on two things, right? God's power and God's purpose. You will be my witness when the Holy Spirit comes upon you, God's power. And then his purpose, you will be my witness, God's power and God's purpose. That's what it looks like for us to understand our missional identity. And in this time of pandemic, what we have desired again and again, we think it's an incredible opportunity God's opened for us. Just like with the persecution, nobody in Acts thought the persecution was a good thing. Nobody right now thinks the pandemic is a good thing. But through the persecution, through that time, God was doing something. He was shaking them up, and he was causing them to be scattered out and to be mobilized in ways that really advanced gospel mission. And here's what I'm telling us, church. Here's what I really believe. I really believe this pandemic, no, it is not a good thing, but I believe that in the sovereign hand of God, he is doing something. He's shaking things up. He's scattering us out. And could it be that this time where we've all been more scattered into our, especially places where we live, just nested in there, could it be that in this time we have a greater opportunity to detach from some of the things we like to associate with mission and then just get reattached to the things that really matter? God's power and God's purpose. Those are the two main things. And those things do not change. I believe that's another blank that you have. These things do not change. In every season, this is another blank. In every season, we are called to be a missional, that's the blank there, to be a missional people. In every season, we are called to be a missional people. I want to take you to Colossians chapter 4, if you've got your Bible, Colossians chapter 4, and I want to look at verses 2 through 6 real quick, because last week we laid the foundation for this understanding that we are a missional people and the motivations for mission. But we're going to begin to get very practical in our next session, starting tonight, about what it looks like to live on mission. And Colossians chapter 2 is a passage that our very own Mitchell Morris taught us in the fall. And I want to go back to it just to remind you of 3 rhythms of missional living and the importance of it. Colossians chapter 4, verses 2 through 6. Okay, everybody there? Colossians chapter 4, verses 2 through 6 says this: "Continue steadfastly in prayer, being watchful in it with thanksgiving. At the same time, pray also for us that God may open to us a door for the word to declare the mystery of Christ, on account of which I'm in prison, that I may make it clear which is how I ought to speak." He goes on and says, "Walk in wisdom toward outsiders, making the best use of the time, and let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person." All right? This is a passage all about missional living. And Mitchell taught us back in the fall, and I just want to remind us, these 3 rhythms, there are 3 rhythms that every single one of us can embrace as it relates to missional living. And I want to put them up on the screen. Number 1, 3 rhythms of missional living. I think you can write these down in your notes. Number 1, identify. Identify. Continue steadfastly in prayer and be watchful in it with thanksgiving. In other words, be watchful. Be on the lookout. And this is the one we're going to be talking about tonight. And the reason we're calling it We Are Prayerful is it comes straight here from Colossians chapter 4. Prayerful and watchfulness. Every day, waking up with a mindset and with a heart's desire, oh God, would you help me see today the opportunities that you've given me? Oh God, would you help me today to have my eyes open to see how you're working around me and the ways that you want me to be involved. So number one is to identify. Number two, we learned, and I'll teach you again tonight, is to invest. To invest. And this really comes from verses 5 and 6. And in that passage, he talks about, let me open my Bible. I want to go to it together. Colossians chapter 4, verse 5 and 6 says, walk in wisdom toward outsiders and make the best use of time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer each person, all right? So what he's saying is invest time. Walk in wisdom with people who aren't yet in a relationship with God. Invest time in them and let your words with them and your time with them be gracious. Make the most of your time with them. Invest. And then that third rhythm, we're talking about next week, by the way, invest, all right? Not next week, but in 2 weeks, the next session. We're going to be talking about invest. And then that third rhythm that I want you to note down is this, invite. Invite. And that really comes from verse 3 and 4. Because he says, at the same time, pray for us that God may open to us a door for the word to declare the mystery of Christ, on account of which I'm in person, so that I may make it clear which is how I ought to speak. In other words, one of the missional rhythms that we've got to have in our everyday life is learning to open our mouth and actually talk to people about Jesus. And in a natural way, through our relationships of trust, begin to talk to them and to invite them to experience God as we have experienced God. So, identify, invest, and invite. Those three rhythms, we're going to start tonight talking about identify, and then in the next 2 sessions, we're going to be talking more about how we can invest and then how we can invite. I'm super excited about it. So tonight, we are going to go straight into this resource, all right? Everybody knows, I think, that we are talking about tonight this resource, Jesus Next Door, all right? And I picked this resource out, and it also has companion resources called Revival Starts Here, and also this little notebook called Love Your Neighbor Journal. And what we're going to be doing over the next weeks is picking some of the best resources that we have and giving you an overview of them, because I know time is short. Sometimes we don't know what to read, or we don't have the time to read. And what I want to do, what we desire to do, is to equip you to really understand God's word and how to live in light of it. So we're going to be beginning the discussion around some of the principles that come from this book, Jesus Next Door, from Dave Clayton. But I want to start by reminding us of what is most important. Do you remember Matthew chapter 22? Tonight we're going to be talking a lot, right, about you practically in your spheres of influence. But what does Jesus say is most important about your life? You remember Matthew chapter 22? When somebody came up and tested Jesus and they asked him, what is the greatest command? And they were trying to put him to a test. They were trying to kind of corner him, but he had an opportunity. And he spoke, and he said, well, I'll tell you this. The greatest commandment is this: you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love, y'all say it with me, you shall love your neighbor as you love yourself. On these 2 commandments depend all the law and all of the prophets. So, if you had to summarize everything that God wants for your life, here it is. Live a life of love. Live a life of love. From your heart, live a life of love. A love in 2 ways. A love with God. Live in love with God. Live in love for God. And then, secondly, with others. Live in love with others. Live in love for others. If we loved the Lord wholly, and we loved others holy, none of the other laws would be needed. I mean, we would fulfill the whole law. That's what Jesus is saying. He made us to live in a love relationship with him and with others. And of course, we know the brokenness of our own hearts because of our sin and rebellion against him and our own selfishness and the brokenness of our world. And that is exactly what Jesus came to redeem. And what Jesus is doing at work in all of us is he's restoring to us hearts of love. Hearts of love. Love for God and love for others. So, this is the most important. But we got to remember, friends, this is more than a command, all right? This is more than a command. It's not only a command, really. It's an invitation. It's an invitation. And for most of us, I think there on your worksheets, the question is not what we should do, but rather how, right? Almost all of us, if I had to say, tell me the greatest commandment, you could quote to me Matthew chapter 22, supposed to love the Lord and supposed to love others. But where we really struggle in life is how to fulfill that. If we're really honest, we know what to do. The challenge is how do we do it? And so this is the conversation that we're going to be having tonight. Even though Jesus' words are clear, most of us will admit we struggle to know how to live it out practically. And let me just teach you a certain principle. If you know that you need to do something, but you don't know how to do it, it's going to lead you to a lot of frustration. And that's why relational discipleship is so important. And conversations like this tonight, I could preach to you all day, love your neighbor as you love yourself, but if you walk out of here and you know that, you feel convicted by that, you desire that, but you don't know how to do it, that could be really frustrating. And my heart tonight, God's heart tonight, is to help us walk in these things practically. So, like I said, it's not just a command, but it's also an invitation. And we are to experience profound joy. Profound joy. I love that. I sign all of my emails in that because the life that God calls us to is a life of joy. And I really believe if we really walk in the things practically that we're going to be talking about tonight, if we really live in love with our neighbors, then we are going to experience a life of joy. So I don't want you to hear this as an obligation, but an invitation tonight. So, here we go. Loving our neighbor. The next section there. Loving our neighbor. In our busy culture, there are two easy mistakes to make for the people around us in our life. All right? There are two easy mistakes to make with the people around us that God has placed around us in our life. Number one easy mistake to make, okay? We're talking about the overflow, the outworking of Matthew 22, loving your neighbor. But one easy mistake for us to make, we're all so busy, we just often will overlook them. Literally, we often will be around people. I don't know about you. Have you ever been in a situation, maybe it's in your neighborhood or in your workplace or somewhere like your gym, and you literally are so consumed with your own thought life or your own schedule or what's going on your phone that literally someone will walk by you or someone will be right around you or something happen right next door, and you literally you're not even aware of it because you're so consumed with what's going on in your own little world. And so often, I believe one of the things that we've got to understand is it is an easy temptation to get so busy that we begin to overlook the very neighbors that God has called us to love. And so one of the things we're going to be doing tonight is, with prayerfulness, work to identify who those people are so that we don't so easily overlook them. Number two, the other easy mistake to make is this, that we would undervalue them. That somehow we see them, but we don't see them as people, we don't see them through God's eyes. We don't see the incredible opportunity, the incredible value that God places on their life, the incredible love that he has for them and desire that he has for them. And we literally will sometimes pull into our garage and we put our garage door down and we see our neighbors doing this or that, but we don't have the heart, the care, the value enough for them to actually go out and engage them and to live life with them and to move toward them in the ways that God desires. So we have to be aware that these two things can happen sometimes in our life, and we need to see our neighbors with new eyes. We need to see our neighbors with God's eyes, okay? Your neighbors are valuable to God. They are. They are valuable to God. We've been talking in our summer series on Sundays about the Imago Dei, how all of us are created in the image of God. He has crafted them in his wonderful image. And therefore, learning to love your neighbors well really matters. Learning to love your neighbors well, it really, really matters. It matters to God. This work that we're talking about tonight of you actually learning to figure out how to practically, more intentionally, effectively be aware of who's around you and engaging them, this really, really matters. They are valuable to God, made in his image. Although meeting the needs of our neighbors through service is certainly a good thing, What God desires is for us to move into lasting relationships that go far beyond one-time acts of service. One of the burdens that we have had as a church, that I have as your pastor, is thinking sometimes that we have people that will sign up for projects, right? Ministry projects. And we're not against projects. But friends, we're called to people. And people aren't projects. People are relational. People are those who are called to love. And so what we are hoping to see is our church, all of us together, moving beyond just the one-time service opportunity mentality, engaging with the church in some event or engaging in some ministry, or maybe it's even something in your own neighborhood, workplace, or place of play. But the reality is we are trying to get you to really see people and to open your heart to say, God, over a long season, however long I'm here, would you help me to build a lasting relationship with people so that I might love them as you love me. So we need to look for more daily and regular opportunities to reflect the goodness of God to those around us. Now the question is, an important question for us to ask is, who is our neighbor? Okay? Who is our neighbor? Now, this is a really, really important question. Because if you don't know the answer to this question, all right, this is the whole point of tonight. We are prayerful. Okay, we are working to identify that first I out of the Colossians 4 passage. If you don't know who your neighbor is, it's going to be a pretty hard time to figure out how to live in love for your neighbor as you love yourself. How do you fulfill the greatest commandment? And this is exactly the question that Jesus engaged in Luke chapter 10. Do you remember? If you got your Bible, flip it over to Luke chapter 10. Because really, what I want to teach you tonight is this. The first step number one, to loving your neighbor is to identify them, okay? So if you are on this journey and you're really desiring tonight, I really believe you do, you're really desiring, God, I want to learn to love my neighbor, or I want to fulfill this of the greatest commands, love the Lord your God, love neighbors, love yourself. I want to do that. Step number one is you have to figure out who they are. You have to identify them. And that's what Jesus is teaching here in Luke chapter 10. Now, on the most basic level, okay, I think everybody's going, well, duh, I know my neighbor. It's like not hard. It's like in the English dictionary, it's like the person who lives around me, right? Okay, it is straightforward. You can look for people around you, but it's a little more complex than that. It's more nuanced than that. In Luke chapter 10, Jesus actually expands our understanding of who qualifies as our neighbor. He tells a story, and the guy literally comes up to Jesus and he says he's desiring to justify himself, and he says to Jesus, who is my neighbor? Okay, now he's playing a trick on him because Jesus has just given him this great command, love your neighbors, love yourself, and the guy's trying to feel better about himself, and he's going, okay, I want to make sure I'm doing this right, so can you please define who my neighbor is so I can check that off the list? And Jesus just blows up his understanding, and he wants to blow up ours too. And he goes and tells the story of the Good Samaritan. Most of us are familiar with it, right? The guy who's going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, he falls upon robbers, he's stripped and beaten, and he's left on the side of the road half dead. And a priest goes down the road, and when he saws him, he passed by. Remember those two mistakes often made, overlooked, undervalued? The guy, so busy, passes by on the other side of the road. Likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place and he saw him, pass by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. And he went to him, and he bound up his wounds. So he noticed him, and he's feeling for him, and he's moving toward him. And he's working in restorative ways in his life, and he pours oil and wine, and then he set him on his own animal, a great sacrifice to himself, taking responsibility, brought him to an inn, and he took care of him. And then in verse 35, the next day, he took out 2 denarii, and he gave them to the innkeeper, saying, take care of him. Whatever you spend, I will repay you when I come back. Now, Jesus finishes the story. Everybody's listening. And then he turns back to the guy who asked the question, who is my neighbor? And Jesus says, which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? See, Jesus totally shifts the question. As Martin Luther King Jr. once said, Jesus had asked, who is my neighbor? And Jesus turns it around and he goes, no, the right question is, what kind of neighbor are you? What kind of neighbor are you? And then the correct answer, of course, is the one who showed him mercy. And Jesus said to him, you go and do likewise. There's so much that we can unpack in this passage, but the thing I want us to unpack is that radical shift of understanding of our neighbor that Jesus presents to us in Luke 10, and that's this. So Jesus' answer to who is your neighbor is this, and I hope you'll write it down. Any person encountered in our daily path who needs to be touched by the love of God. Who is our neighbor? It's any person. For the priest and for the Levite, I bet that guy that got beat up left on the side of the road wasn't their actual neighborhood neighbor. In other words, his house probably wasn't next to theirs. And yet, he was in their path. And he needed the love of God. And what Jesus is saying is those guys should have been a neighbor. The Samaritan also wasn't the geographical next-door neighbor probably to this guy. In fact, they're very different, from very different groups. This is an amazing story, and I wish I could teach it more. But the reality is, it's not about just living next door to somebody, but that guy was in his path. And in compassion and love, he stopped. So what Jesus is saying is, look, you've got to rethink this. You got to rethink it. It's any person encountered in our daily path. That is who needs to be touched by the love of God. So it's not just our people next door. It's not. It's also our coworkers. It's also the nurse who helps us with medication. It's also the barista in Starbucks or in Cafe Eclectic. It's also the regulars that we see at the Harbortown Gym or at the Y. It's also the people that we see on lunch break in our office. This is our neighbor. And Jesus is saying, do you understand that? Any person that's in your path that needs the love of God, do you understand they are your neighbor? Now, I want you to understand something, and then I'm going to take a break and let you get into groups, okay? All of us have 3 spheres of influence. So tonight we're going to be talking about 3 different spheres of influence, all right? All of us have 3 spheres of real opportunity and influence in our life. And I want you to write this down. Number 1, we call it the sphere of where we live. Where we live. Now, in each one of these spheres, we have neighbors, okay? This is the most obvious neighbor sphere because it's what we think about with, like, if you're in an apartment complex, the people across the hall are next door to you or above you or below you. If you're in a neighborhood, the house next to you or across the street from you, this is what we think about, where you live. And this is your first sphere. The second sphere that we talk about is where you work, or if you're a student, we will describe it as where you study. This is your next sphere of influence. You have neighbors in this sphere, okay? These are the people that are in your office building. They're the people who are in your hospital complex. They're the people who you serve and you co-labor with. If you're a student, it's people who are on campus with you or who live in your dorm or who sit around you in class. This is what we're talking about. And then the third one is where you play. Now, some of you need to play more because we're just too intense with work, our culture is. But the reality is what we're talking about here is when you're off, what do you like to do? And where do you do it? Where are those rhythms that, you go to the gym, or perhaps you're journaling at the coffee shop, or perhaps you're running through your neighborhood. You're at Target if you're like my wife, Michelle. Where are those places that you enjoy when you have time off? These are your 3 spheres of influence. So, real quick, what I want to do is I'm going to ask Candace to break us up into randomized groups. We're going to be with these groups at other points through the night. And so I hope you have fun. Here's what I want you to do, just real quick, very quickly in your groups. Let's give maybe 3 minutes, Candace. What I want to do is have you guys just identify real quick with a simple word or 2, where do you live? Where do you work, and where do you play? Your main place, all right? Main places you live, working place. So for me, it'd be like I live on Mud Island in Harbortown. Where do I work? I work at Island Community Church. And where do I play? I love being at the coffee shop downtown, all right? So those 3 things. So do that real quick, get to know each other, and we'll come back in groups later as we go on. Enjoy, have fun, go on, get to your groups. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. Everybody's coming back, and we're so glad you're back. Thank you so much for hanging out with each other. You're going to get to do that in just a little bit, and I hope that was helpful. So it's going to be very important. This evening, we're going to be talking about some very practical things here in just a second. And then you're going to need to do homework between now and your small group next week, okay? But it's going to be very important that for you, as we're talking about these things, you're thinking very personally, my neighborhood, my workplace, my hobby place or my play place, wherever that is when I'm off, okay? You've got to think that way. These are not just principles. These are very practical, and you've got responsibility to learn to take the things that we're equipping you to do tonight and to live them out in your life in these spheres of influence. So those are your 3 spheres, and what I want to do now is actually begin to walk through each sphere, okay? And what I'm going to do is put up on the screen here, we're going to be walking through questions that you can ask in each sphere. Stay with me in each question, and again, don't get overwhelmed. The notes will come to you later. If you miss something, I really would just tell you, you can get it later. On your worksheets, if you're using them, you've got the questions to fill in the blanks with, and then you've got a column over on the right side for scriptural principles. That is blank, and you can use that to fill in as we go. But what I want to do is to help you to identify your neighbors in all 3 of these spheres. Basically, what I'm doing is asking you to exegete, to uncover your spheres of influence so that you can answer the question practically, who is my neighbor? And honestly, guys, I really mean this with all of my heart. I have learned so much in the last 3 months since we've been in this pandemic about my own neighbors, especially in the sphere of where I live. Things that I just didn't even know before. And I really believe that we have neighbors all around us in these 3 spheres of our life that we just don't know. And so what I'm trying to do tonight is to teach you by helping you with this resource to give you the opportunity to really think about who these neighbors are that God has called you, commanded you, invited you to love. So that's the very thing we're doing. So let's start with sphere 1, and sphere 1 is where you live. And the first question that we're going to ask is, do you know your neighbors' names? Okay? Do you know your neighbors' names? Now, there's a scriptural principle here. One of the things Nathaniel was amazed about is from Jesus was that he knew his name, right? And I really believe that one of the things we have the opportunity to do in a place, in our actual neighborhood where we live, is to actually learn the names of people around us. Now, for Michelle and I, here's what it looks like. We keep track. I've got a note system in my phone. Every time we meet a neighbor in our neighborhood, what we've started doing is actually writing notes. We write when we met them, their names, as much as we can remember them from the conversations we have, and then some notes about them, where they live, some other things that they've told us, so that we can be more intentional about not just saying, hey, how you doing, when you see somebody random walking around your neighborhood, but actually you can call out to them and say, hey, Chris, hey, John, hey, Conchita. You have that opportunity to actually name the people who live around you. And one of the things that you can ask yourself is, do you know their names? And challenge yourself as they're walking by. I'd really like to get to know their names. And it's more than just their name. It's something about them and their story. The name leads into something. But if you just see that person, oh, yeah, that's that guy. How many of us we know that guy that we see in the elevator, that girl that walks her dog, and you know what the dog looks like, but you don't know her. So that's the first question to ask is, do you know your neighbors' names? If not, how can you introduce yourself? Okay? How can you introduce yourself? That's a good question to ask. How could you do it? Number 2, question. Who has a pet? And another question you could ask is this. Who has kids? Okay? Who has a pet and who has kids? The scriptural principle here is paying attention to the people that God puts in your path. That's exactly what we were just talking about with the story. Who in your neighborhood has a pet? And who in your neighborhood has kids? Okay? Is there someone in your neighborhood, for instance, with the kids thing, who has recently had a baby? Okay? Can you offer something to them? Michelle and I were amazed at our neighborhood. We had the opportunity when Emma was born, we had neighbors showing up at our house, just offering like a teddy bear, just offering a little card. And I was like, my goodness, I don't think a lot of those folks even have the same spiritual walk with God as we do, and they're bringing things to the house, and it creates opportunities. When you start to ask that question, who in your neighborhood has recently had a baby? Then you have an opportunity to love them, to just go and to take something small to them, be kind to them, drop something off, and through that to take a next step in a relationship. Who has a pet? All right? Some of us are pet lovers. Do you like animals? Is there a way that you could actually engage them with their pet and actually offer to them some kind of help with their pet? It's an opportunity. With kids, Are there appropriate ways that you can interact with kids? One of the things we have loved is going to a neighborhood playground, and there's people there with other kids, and there's also people there that just stop by, like grandmother types. They're not creepers, okay? Don't be a creeper. None of us want that. But the reality is, in respectful ways, in loving ways, are there ways that we could interact with children in our neighborhood that brings relational opportunity, all right? Another question to ask is, in your neighborhood, have you ever thought about who is elderly and disabled? I mean, take a list. All of these things, here's what I want you to do in the next week. You're going to have to answer, I'm asking you to answer all of these questions practically for your neighborhood. I want you to make a list of names. Who in your neighborhood is elderly? And who in your neighborhood is disabled? Just like Jesus taught us in Luke 29, he calls us to be a good neighbor. And that includes being a neighbor to all, especially those who are the most vulnerable. In this time of the pandemic, it's been amazing to me to be out in our neighborhood more and just walking around. I have seen things in our neighborhood that I haven't seen in the year and 5 months that we lived there until now. We've got a lot more people of a lot different backgrounds than I ever realized. And there are people in our neighborhood that are older and who have struggles. And I bet there are in your neighborhood too. And often these people are overlooked and undervalued. And we need new eyes to see like God sees. So the question is, who are they? And how is it that God might call you to be a good neighbor to them? Pure and undefiled religion is this: taking care of widows and orphans, taking care of those who have struggled, taking care of themselves, who cannot repay. This is the very heart of God. And we are called to be neighbors of people, not just who are like us, but people who are different than us and people who have needs and cannot repay. Look around and see who they are. Another thing you can do is look around and see who is around your own age or in a similar life stage in your neighborhood. Jesus teaches us a principle of searching for the missing. Luke chapter 15, verse 4, to be intentional. He talks about the good shepherd goes out and looks for those who are lost or broken, who need to find their way, and to be intentional about moving toward them. Have you done a survey of just who are the folks in your neighborhood, and who are they that are like you and are the same season of life as you? And can you search for them? Can you look for them and look for ways to engage them, like a good shepherd going after them, seeking to build a relationship with them, not just noticing them, but actually wanting to know them? It's a really cool thing. Are there single moms and dads around you? That's the next question. Are there single moms and dads around you? I think one of the most overlooked groups of people sometimes in our neighborhoods could be those who are, have a broken relationship from the past or have had no marriage relationship, and yet they have kids. And do you understand the burdens that come as a single parent? The reality is, Jesus calls us, the scriptural principle here is to serve with humility. John chapter 13, verse 14. To wash others' feet, right? To those who are the greatest among you are those who are the servants. Could we posture ourselves with those single moms and dads around us? How might they need help from time to time? How can we posture ourselves as a servant, asking them, is there something we could pick up from the grocery store for them, or helping with yard work, or just anything else? It might not look to you like they have problems, but have you ever engaged them in that conversation? Have you ever asked? Some of it is just taking the time to ask and just being willing to go there and just say, hey, is there ever anything that I can do to help? And just being that kind of neighbor and serving with humility. Another question to ask is, are you already close with someone in your neighborhood? Is there someone that you already have a relationship with that you can go to the next level? The scriptural principle here is to share your story. Acts chapter 1, verse 8, we talked about earlier. We're not called just to stay on the surface level, but maybe you've, in your neighborhood, or people you know have some kind of relationship with. You've had some opportunity to be with them, but you need to take that next step. You need to take that next step to be intentional with them, to open conversations about the heart, about their emotional life, about their family background, about their relationship with God eventually, we hope, to take that next step, to use the opportunity in your neighborhood to go deeper. Next, do your neighbors know each other? All right? This is another thing that I want you to work on answering in the next week. Start drawing a web, all right, a spider web looking thing of which neighbors know other neighbors, okay? Do your neighbors know each other? How do they get together? This is another thing. So for instance, in my neighborhood, we have learned that there's monthly socials. and people get together. There's also a little garden club and other bird watching club and things like that, okay? I don't really totally understand all of the groups, but I know there's groups. I see them getting together. Even in my back alley, I've got neighbors that hang out time to times, and I can start to identify the rhythms of those things. And is there a natural opportunity to either show up at those things, or maybe if you notice the things that people are interested in, to even organize something for your neighbors to get together? So if you notice that people are getting together for football, could you create a football party? Or if people are enjoying cookout in the yard, could you host a cookout sometime? Or in my neighborhood, if people are getting together for a monthly social, could I raise my hand and say, hey, I'd be glad to host a monthly social sometime soon? If people are trick-or-treating together, could you join in that trick-or-treating opportunity? Or et cetera, et cetera. The principle here is the importance of presence. John chapter 1, verse 14 says, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. One translation says he moved into the neighborhood. In other words, he showed up and he was present with us. This is what Jesus did for us in coming for us. And we get to opportunity to just be present. One of the things that you can do, Michelle and I have learned this during this pandemic, is just literally, we have learned the value of just sitting on our front porch. We have a back porch, and it's cool back there, and it's private back there, but one of the things we have really seen the opportunity for is just to be out on our front porch, just to be present, and to even look for those opportunities and taking walks around the neighborhood. I don't know where you live, but in your space, how can you learn just to be present and to be available and to be intentional about not only identifying where these people are hanging out, but you yourself moving into that space or creating a space for that? Another question is, are there other followers of Jesus in your neighborhood? Again, I want you to do this work for you in the survey this week. Are there other followers of Jesus in your neighborhood? The scripture principle here is to pray with belief from Mark chapter 1, verse 24. If there are other followers in your neighborhood, the question is, how can you partner with them to identify things that are happening in your neighborhood, to identify needs that are there, to compare your list of these questions with their list? But then also, what would happen if you started to gather regularly together to pray? Pray is in response to needs of the present, but also vision for the future. And some of us in our neighborhoods need to understand that, yeah, they may not go to ICC, but they do love the Lord. And you might be some of the only believers in your hall in your apartment or in the street of your neighborhood, but you can begin to form a relationship with them and then go there in conversation to say, hey, have you noticed any needs here in this neighborhood? To learn them and to understand their heart of mission for your community, and then to begin to pray together intentionally for the things in your neighborhood. One of the things we've been praying for our neighborhood is more believers to move in, and one of the opportunities that we see is God has brought some people in, and we haven't done it yet, but we need to start gathering people together to be thinking about the neighborhood together and to be praying together. So praying with belief is important. Another question for the neighborhood is this: what skills and passions do you have that you may be able to offer to your neighborhood? A scriptural principle here is to leverage my passion from Mark chapter 1, verse 17. To leverage your passion. Is there a sports league in the neighborhood you can coach? Can you organize pickup games? Can you teach music lessons to people in your neighborhood, perhaps? Or could you provide a home-cooked meal to someone? That's something that it would make a world of difference, probably. Even those who don't even need it. Just saying, hey, sometime I'd like to bring you dinner if you're good at cooking. What a blessing to your neighbors. Could you help with a handyman project? Right now, I've got flies coming out of my kitchen sink. I don't know how to work with a U-trap. But if I did know how to work with a U-trap, I think that's what you call it, I would probably volunteer that for others who had flies coming out of their sink, all right? If you've got things like that you're good at, why don't you offer that to somebody else, okay? What unique skills and passions do you have here's the goal. The goal is establishing connection with other people. Yes, serving them, but also leading to that relationship, that longer relationship of trust and opportunity to help them to know the Lord. Another question you can ask is this: do you know of birthdays, anniversaries, etc., other special events in the lives of your neighbors that are coming up soon? Okay? I want you to work on this week. Some of us are going to go, I don't know. I don't know my neighbor's birthday, or I don't know their anniversary, and here's your project. Find out. Right? Some of it is you can notice when they have party and there's a sign on the door or something going on, but some of it is just a conversation you might have. Make a note of it where you're making note of their names, and then celebrate it. Do something special for them. How much would that mean to your neighbors? The principle here is going the extra mile from Matthew chapter 5, verse 41. Just go above and beyond, right? Like the Chick-fil-A principle. They have this principle too, going above and beyond. And what happens is when you do that, it often leads to opportunities. People are going, what? Like that means so much. And it leads to opportunities of deeper relationship trust and gospel showing and gospel sharing. Another question you could ask is, are there runners or walkers or exercise groups in your neighborhood? Who has moved in recently is another question. I'm going to fly through these because of time. Who has moved in recently? The principle here is see where God is working. Look around. Matthew 13, look up. Do you see that the fields are ripe with harvest? Do you see where God is working? In other words, do you believe that the book of Acts that says that God has appointed times and places in his sovereignty and he moves people around to different times and places? Do you believe it? That God might move somebody onto your hall in your apartment complex or your condominium complex, or God might be moving somebody into your neighborhood, and do you see that he's working? Do you see that that person moving into your proximity is a part of his plan for that person? Do you believe it? Make a list of those who've moved in recently. Next, is there a neighbor with a for sale sign up? Motivated by love, John 3:16, right? Motivated by love. Is there any opportunity with a for sale sign up? How can you bless this neighbor before they move out? How could you ask about their plans or take a meal or help with a house project or go and help them with packing? Again, it's relational opportunities. Is there anyone in your neighborhood, is another question, having a yard or garage sale? Principle here from Mark chapter 5, never be too busy, right? Sometimes we're too busy to even do things like, hey, just showing up at somebody's little yard sale. We've had neighbors that recently, we had a birthday for Caroline out on our front porch. We had neighbors who just stop by. One of the things that the pandemic has shown all of us, I believe, is that it's given us the gift of time. And I think what has happened in my life, Michelle and I, we've slowed down. We're not crazy every night. We're not out to eat at restaurants. We're home. And being present in the neighborhood and not so busy has given us, we found ourselves out on the street talking to neighbors that we've never talked to in depth before. Just slowing down, showing up at these yard sales and things. This is an opportunity for us. Never be too busy. Another question is there anyone in your neighborhood who doesn't fit the same profile as the majority? Is there anyone in your neighborhood who doesn't fit the same profile as the majority? Now, we're talking about race, we're talking about religion, we're talking about economic status, we're talking about disability, we're talking about social status and diversity. How can you make them feel loved and included? Again, the principle here from John chapter 1-39, reflecting Jesus to others. Our desire is to reflect Jesus to others, to move toward them, and to make them feel included, to love as he has loved us. Make a list of those people who you think might feel like an outsider and work to invite them in. The next question is there someone who lives around you who has served or helped you? All right? The principle here is Luke chapter 10, verse 9, to show and tell. In other words, it's not enough just to show good things, although it's part of it, but we've got to lead to opportunities to share. One of my next door neighbors recently has come over to help me, and I was so blessed by it. He said, hey, while y'all are out of town, would you be okay if I help water your garden? That gesture it's amazing, and it's hard to receive. But it's also an opportunity to get engaged and to even you do some back and forth things and serving one another and developing that relationship. We had some other neighbors that picked up packages for us on our porch while we were away and then brought them when we came back. And there's opportunities for us to do the same. And through those opportunities to serve, for it to lead into deeper conversations. Another one is there anyone near you in a season of grief? Do you know that anybody around you could be in a season of grief? Have you had any neighbors that experienced tragedy or death, or a spouse that has been lost, or a child, or anybody who's lost a job, or a dream fall to the wayside, or is anybody who needs encouragement in a season of pain? The principle here is to love the brokenhearted in Matthew chapter 5, verse 4. To love the brokenhearted and to be a presence of peace. Like Jesus in the midst of the storm with those in his boat, he was a presence of peace. And we, through our presence, get to move toward them and offer hope and offer our presence and offer just the peace of God and even offer our prayers. And you'd be amazed as you do that, as you love people well in those moments of pain, the opportunities that leads them to. I remember in my workplace, which we're talking about our neighborhood now, but in my workplace, many years ago when I was still working in marketing before God called me to ministry, I had a heart to love and serve others, and many people would keep me at a distance relationally. But I'll never forget one of the coworkers who was the most hostile to me because of what I stood for in the Lord, in a moment of his own pain as he was going through a tragedy in his family. I just reached out casually, even though I knew before he had been very resistant. I just said, hey, I'm here. I love you. If there's anything I can do, let me know. And he became so open to me during that time of brokenness and pain. And I saw gospel opportunities multiply in that relationship. Look for those moments. Love people well. And when they are in pain, don't move further away from them. Move toward them and see it as an opportunity to love as God has loved us. What other ideas do you have? What I want for you to do right now is break up into groups for another 3 minutes and discuss real quick the best of what you've heard, the thing that you stood out to you the most and you went, aha, that's interesting. I've never thought about that before, okay? So in your groups, the same groups that we were just in, I want you to just reflect on briefly what stood out to you of this teaching, okay? And then, like I told you, this next week, what you're going to be doing is actually taking these questions and writing out a list of things so that you have the opportunity to really name specific people. That's not what this time is for. This time is to reflect on the questions that I've just given you and the principles that I've just taught you, and just say to one another, this is something that stood out to me. So let's do that for the next few minutes, and we'll come back, and I'll quickly teach you how to take this same approach for the other 2 spheres of influence that you have in your work and your place of play. Y'all have fun in your groups. We'll be back in a second. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. We're so glad that you had that time together. Again, you're going to be working out the specifics, answering those questions for your specific place where you live this week. Now, I want to fly through the next 2 spheres, and here's what we're going to do. You're going to take the same scriptural principles that I just taught, and you're going to work to identify which principles apply to the things that which principles apply to the questions that we're going to teach you for these next 2 spheres. And what we hope is that you start in one primary sphere. My desire right now, because of the pandemic, is that you start in the place where you live, because I believe in this season, this is our ripe opportunity. And for too long, we as a church, I remember this pandemic has actually reminded me of the time when before we had a building and before we had programming. And we were just a church that lived in neighborhoods in the downtown area, and we knew that the mission rested on us, who we were and how we lived in the places where we lived. And that is what I think we have the opportunity to do in this pandemic, is to focus on that sphere where we live. But we taught 3 spheres, and it's true we have neighbors in all 3 spheres. So briefly, I want to give you the overview of the kind of questions that you can ask to identify your neighbors in the place where you work and the place where you play. And then, again, you can go out from there this week, matching those to scriptural principles, but also working to build out an actual list of names in each of those spheres, just like we're doing for the place that you live. But if you only have time for one sphere, start with a place where you live, because I think that's our ripe opportunity right now. So let's move to sphere 2, and that is a place where you work and study. Here's the kind of questions that you can ask. Number 1, again, like neighbors that you live around with your coworkers, do you know their names? Now, for a place like ICC, that's kind of awkward if I don't know the names of people here because it's so small. But the reality is some of us work in bigger places, and you should know the names of people. The person who picks up your trash in your office, or the lady who is perhaps seated as a secretarial position out in the hallway, and you pass her a lot, but you may not work directly with her, but you could speak to her by name. Do you know their names? If not, how can you introduce yourself? Number 2, is there anyone that you don't know well, but you would like to know better? Is there anybody, you can write down those names, who you don't know very well, you know their name, but you don't know them well, and you want to know them better? Here's what you can do for that. Could you take them out to lunch one day? Or sit with them at lunch one day? You, just like Jesus, we take the first move. You take the first move in loving them. Ask them, hey, can we hang out sometime? Number 3, has there anyone in your life, in your workplace, had any painful life changes? Any painful life changes? Has there been any deaths, similar to those who we live around, any deaths or someone who's ill or things like that? Is there anything you can do to bless them? Can you offer to take them a meal? Or could you offer perhaps just to write a card or to simply ask how they're doing? Another question you can ask is there anybody who has had a special event, like has been recently engaged or maybe recently married or perhaps anybody who's recently had a baby, all right? Look for special events in the lives of people you work with and go the extra mile. Celebrate that with them. Go out of your way to buy that card or to send that gift or to have that conversation or to show up if you get an invitation. These are opportunities around us every day, and it's part of loving people well. With the babies, is there something you could offer, all right? Take out, we just had Emma. It was an amazing act of kindness. The meals that showed up at our door. You'll never, ever know, if you've never had a baby, how much it means to get a meal at your door. If you have anybody in your workplace that has had a baby recently, offer to take them a meal or to send an Uber Eats, all right? Let's be honest, that's what I'd be doing if I had to take a meal. Hey guys, Uber Eats on the way, but it still means a ton. All right, is there someone at your workplace or school who does not fit in? Who's different, who gets bullied? I bet you could connect that to the scriptural principle that we taught earlier. Do you look for those people? Do you know who they are? And do you move toward them? All right? Is there a space in your office building or in your school where you might have lunch with a few coworkers? Could you consider initiating lunch with them? And if you are having lunch with them already, instead of just eating at your desk, go be with people, okay? Be with people. And if you already are with people, how can you be the person at the table that initiates a conversation that is deeper than just the surface level, all right? That's the question. The next one here, is there anyone new to your office? New people in our workplaces or in our schools are an amazing opportunity for influence in ministry. Inviting them in, knowing they're searching for community, searching for belonging already. You be the first mover. Get to know them. Take them and say, hey, do you know where the latest grocery store is? Or have you tried this new place? Let me tell you where I like to go get an ice cream. Do that with them and build relationships. Also, another question, do you have people who report to you? How can you make sure you treat them with dignity? How can you lead them in a way that actually gives gospel opportunity through the way that you lead them? Also, another question is, are there followers of Jesus in your workplace or school? Are there people who are receptive to or curious about faith? How can you engage them in conversations about your workplace? Maybe you've never done this. Maybe you know some other Christians and you're grateful that there's Christians in your workplace, but you've never actually talked to them about your shared vision to see people come to know the Lord in your workplace. Or maybe you've never gotten together with them to actually pray for your office or pray for your coworkers. One of the things that I did when I was in the marketing office was I took initiative to start a Bible study. I know that Lauren Nutton in our church and some others at St. Jude campus used to do that as well. They might still do that, where they were having Bible study together. They had freedom. They reserved a conference room, had the ability to do that as employees, and they started a Bible study. And guess what? Many people came to the Bible study that they were having together because of the open invite of it than ever would show up to a church. They had people who were seeking God, who weren't in church but were seeking God because those believers were together in the workplace. See those opportunities just like that. Who has upcoming events? Again, it's an opportunity to celebrate, to help, to show care. Who has birthdays or anniversaries happening? Do any of your coworkers or classmates hang out together after work or after school? Can you join them? Can you hang out with them? Can you initiate a gathering with them? Going the extra mile to just be with them. Also, how can you support your coworkers or classmates outside of the normal context? For whom can you ask to pray? You would never believe that simple question, the opportunities that it brings. How can I pray for you? Just going there and asking people if you need prayer. That's one of the main questions that I used when I was in the marketing workplace, in a secular workplace. I would just ask, how can I pray for you? That's a non-threatening question. It shows care, concern, and if they say nothing you can pray for, that's fine. The worst they can do is say nothing. But you never believe how that question could lead to opportunities with people just to open up a deeper kind of relationship and discussion about the Lord. Another question is there someone who consistently goes out of their way to help or serve you? And transitioning that, they've got some kind of heart of service and connecting with them in that, returning the favor, and then using that as an opportunity to go there spiritually. All right, I want to go to that third sphere, and we'll have our last group conversation, and we'll dismiss for the night because of time. And we're so grateful for the time you're investing. But that last sphere, I want to give you these last set of questions, and then we'll talk about it together, and then we'll be dismissed, all right? The last set of questions is this. This is now for the third sphere of where you play, all right? Where you spend your time off. You're starting to get a rhythm now of probably the kinds of diagnostic questions you can ask, but here we go. First of all, you need to answer, where do you frequently go? all right? Gym, library, sporting events, music venues, restaurants, coffee shops, bars, restaurants, recreational sports leagues, retail stores, parks. Where is it that you typically go? And the next question is, how can you get opportunities? How can you take an opportunity to turn an insignificant encounter into something more? Sitting next to someone at a dog park, or being around them on the treadmill at the gym, or sitting next to them in that place where you go to the coffee shop and you notice those people who are there a lot at the same time as you are. How do you take those moments and turn them into something more? The person who's making your coffee, who you see a lot, they always make you that coffee. Or who, how can you engage them, care for them? How can you go the next step? Ask them how their day has been or how long they have worked there. One of the things that I've been amazed by, people will say to me as they're with me, Michelle jokes with me, she's like, how are you the mayor of Harbortown? I'm not the mayor of Harbortown. I have learned the skill of asking people questions. Just being friendly, noticing people. Instead of just walking in when they go to serve you at the restaurant or whatever and they sit you down, no, stop and say, how are you doing? Look them in the eyes, engage them, and go to the same places again and again. We typically do that when we're playing anyway. Just care for them and you just watch how the opportunities go. Third, are there people you regularly see whom you can get to know better, all right? That's self-explanatory, but are there people that you regularly see you can get to know better? In other words, for instance, there was a waiter who waited on me downtown at the little tea shop downtown, and I won't name his name, but the reality is he waited on me a lot, and eventually I said, hey, because we'd had some conversations that I engaged him in who he is and how he's doing and his background. I said, hey, would you like to go have a meal sometime? All right? This is just a waiter that suddenly turned into an opportunity to go hang out with him at Huey's downtown, and that led to more opportunities after that. How can you take those people you see regularly and then take that next step to just get to know them better? Next, are there practical opportunities for you to purposely engage people in the places you've named? Next, for whom can you ask to pray? We talked about that before. Next, is there someone with whom you have favor? Is there someone with whom you have favor? In other words, does the manager at the gym enjoy talking to you? Are there simple ways you can encourage or bless or serve those who have shown you kindness? Next, can you invite someone to join you in your spiritual community? If you have gotten to know someone at Cafe Kyo downtown or Comeback Coffee or at your gym, how can you naturally invite them to just join you in small group if you're doing a small group fellowship? Or how could you naturally say, hey, by the way, I worship at ICC and we're doing online right now. This is what we've been doing with our neighbors. They've been asking, how we're doing and things. I just go there. I just say, hey, by the way, we worship online on Sundays and you're welcome to join us anytime. Just dropping those invitations, inviting them to dinner with friends if you're hanging out with spiritual community or having church friends over, just welcoming them into your life. Now, Lauren is going to be teaching more about this in the next session, even more scriptural, spiritual principles about these things, but I wanted to begin tonight to give you the diagnostic questions for how to identify. Because tonight, friends, what I'm saying to you is how in the world could you love your neighbor if you don't know who your neighbor is? And our neighbor is so much more than just often what we think. It's those people that God has put in our path that need the love of God. And we have neighbors of all kinds all around us. And the first step to loving neighbor is to identify them, to be prayerful and mindful every day as we wake up. Oh God, would you help me to see with your eyes, see who's around me, the people you put in my path. Help me not be the priest that passes by on the other side or the Levite that's too busy. Help me to be the one who sees, who stops, who cares, who moves toward people with compassion and sacrifice, willing to help them to know you. So what I want you to do as you close tonight is get back into your groups. Candace is going to assign you back into your groups, and this is the last thing we're doing. You're not going to be coming back to me. So I want you to get in your groups. We'll put a time limit on it of 10 minutes. And these last 10 minutes, what we'd encourage you to do, you can finish before the 10 minutes, okay? You can finish in 2, or you can decide you don't even want to talk if this is lame for you, but I don't think it is. What I want you to do in however much time, up to 10 minutes, is just to talk about what stood out to you about these last 2 spheres, about your workplace and the place that you play. And think about right now the things that are coming up to your heart and to your mind, the things that you're going, wow, I do have that opportunity, or I have seen that person, and I could ask that question, or I could take that next step in relationship. Just talk about those things. And then please do not forget, before small groups next Wednesday night, I'm asking that you take these questions that I've given you tonight. We'll send out the full worksheet filled in for you, but you take these and work through them and identify specific names for each of the questions that's been asked as much as you can. If you have to pick only one sphere, start with the place you live because of the pandemic time right now, and see the opportunities, the missional identity that God's given us according to his power and his purpose. Y'all enjoy your discussion in your group. I love you. I can't wait to see you again on Sunday, and y'all have a great night. I will see you very, very soon. Thanks again for being here with us.